Yes, I am alive and kicking. And I know, it has been a long time since I last uploaded, and I apologize for that. But that out of the way, let's get straight to the topic. This topic has been in my mind for ages, and now, I think is the best time to drop a bomb like this, as I have to spark some fire as I have been inactive for nearly 3 months. So, if you're wondering what is the debunk on Oren going to be, then let me tell you, there are going to be tons and tons of stuff on him, which would make him nearly unscalable. So first of all, before the debunk, let me just give a small introduction and some scales that are made for Oren based on different interpretations of him by different people. So, Oren the Absolute, or just the Absolute, is a human from a world with advanced technology who later in the story realizes the truth about his existence and ascends to his throne as an absolute being. The character comes from a creepypasta series with 7 parts, published under subreddit r/no sleep in Reddit by username Crimson Bayonet. Note, it is just posted under a Reddit forum and not an officially published work. Remember this point. I will refer to it in later parts of this video. So now, Oren has different scales depending on different interpretations. Some stretch the absolute infinity statement to make him seem like the strongest character in fiction, which is already out of the window. As any, statements like this might work under their own narrative, but outside of it, in comparisons it has no value. So statements like absolute infinity, true infinity, and all are statements which are not considered as the top-tier scaling terms, as they are too vague. But through this statement, you can take Oren up to boundless, as absolute infinity, the one by Cantor, can still take a character to boundless tier. The reasonable scale of him would be high outerversal to baseline boundless, due to there being mention of him being superior to cardinals such as Aleph or others, which in itself is surely vague, but it still mentions Aleph and other cardinals which you can take as high outer to boundless, depending upon your view on it. But there are going to also be people who take metafictional statements way too seriously, and therefore, this people will say he is above fiction and all nonsense. Just ignore and move on if you encounter such people. And finally, this last scale is a bit wild. There is a statement regarding Oren being above all, and in that there were 3 notable mentions, which were extended modal realism, V equals ultimate L conjecture, and Kabbalah. These 3 are wildly high in terms of scale. These terms are basically the pinnacle of tiering system, and being above them means being above the entire tiering system, so you know how wild this claim is. But there is a reason why I'm saying this is just a wild claim, and not a valid one, as these terms are just tossed around purely with the purpose of adding it to make Oren sound strong. There is no explanation for any of these terms and are just name-dropped for only the purpose of power scaling. And just a single statement cannot take you to that high level. You need a lot more than that. Therefore, these statements are just too vague to be considered true. But as always, there are going to be people who will consider these statements by adding the tag highest interpretation just to rank the character to the highest level possible. So yeah, these are the 4 main scales that can be seen regarding Oren. There are many other scales as well, but mainly these are seen more in debates and scaling related content. So these are the scales. Now to the debunk. Where do you think Oren would scale after this debunk? Will he be outerversal? Will he be hyperversal? Or will he be a Goku victim? The answer is none of them. Oren will belong to the trashcan tier, along with Anti-Principle and many others like him, due to shit tons of reasons. Let me show you the list of reasons why Oren belongs to the streets. Firstly, there is something about the author of the story, Crimson Bayonet. I will say this crystal clearly. A verse which is made by a power scaler or someone who knows power scaling would never be considered for power scaling, as it is simply cheating. And why is it cheating, you may ask? Then let's take an example. Let's take 2 person, A and B, and let's say they both are appearing for a test. In the test, B beat A by a long margin and won the test. But there is a big problem. A purely studied for the test and scored as much possible through just the knowledge he had, which helped him get some marks, whereas B pre-hand had the answers to the question of the test, due to which he can score higher than A. So this logic is also seen here. A writer with knowledge of power scaling can literally beat all of the other verses purely by the fact that they already know top-tier terms of power scaling and can create a textbook high-scaling cosmos to defeat other verses. And moreover, then it would be just debate over who can stack more layers above assertion level for eternity, with no logical sense or proper base. Which is stupid shit. And that's why only those stories which are made for storytelling and related stuff are scaled. No verse with intent of power scaling should be scaled. And now, how can we tell if a verse is based on power scaling? There are two ways to find out, and that are the story and the author's background. Well, from the info I can get from all of this, the author of Oren is a Reddit user for nearly 2 years, and mostly all posts are about creepypasta related. But there are 3 comments which is regarding versus battle. So that is small hint that he is aware of versus debates and all shit. But that doesn't prove he is a power scaler or is knowledgeable regarding power scaling. But now, the next stuff is the confirmation that the author is 100% knowledgeable about power scaling of the top level for sure. And that stuff is the mention of EMR, V equals ultimate L conjecture, and Kabbalah. This is the definitive proof that the author knows about boundless tier scales. No random guy is going to toss around terms like this in a story without any purpose, especially when there is no explanation or even reason behind the usage of these terms. These terms are purely used for power scaling purposes and are used to scale Oren to the highest possible tier and beyond. So along with creepypasta story, bit of focus is also given to power scaling related stuff. So as the power scaling related stuff is included in this verse is not considered for power scaling. But I gotta say, even though the verse does include a bit of power scaling related things here and there, it still has a decent story, so it's not garbage in terms of writing. Now, next point that I would like to mention is vague statements. Usually the statements regarding Oren's prowess are not explained properly and feels like they are just added for the purpose of power scaling with no value to the story. The example for this is given already through the 3 high-tier terms that I said before, and there are many other instances like this. The vagueness of the statements makes it difficult for a proper scale to be made. Therefore, there are a lot of different scales based on different interpretations. So the vagueness of statements is one more reason for Oren's unscalability. Next one is no limits fallacy. The terms like limitless, absolute, and unending power, etc. terms fall under no limit fallacy. And the next one is the nail on the coffin, which is OC fallacy. And I have been waiting to say this for a while now. For the longest time, I let Oren slide due to Creative Commons license. But from now on, I don't believe on that bullshit, so as it is not an official published story or series, it would be considered as an OC. There is a good reason why only recognized and officially published stories are only used for power scaling, and that is that, by keeping this criteria, all those effortless works made purely for the purpose of scaling, with no intent of writing a good story, would be declared unscalable. So this helps filter those uninteresting, nonsensical works with no objective except for power scaling. As to publish a book, it takes quite a bit of money, and also a preset standard that would have to be followed for the book to be successful. So that's the reason why these OCs are not considered for power scaling, and only recognize well-written and officially published books are taken for power scaling. And as Oren belongs to a story under Reddit as a Reddit post, it won't be considered as an official character and would be considered just as an OC regardless if he has a verse or not. Not being a part of an official work makes you fall under the OC department. So the long run of the cosmic imposter ends here. The absolute is not seeming much absolute in terms of power scaling. But there is a big difference between being overpowered and being overpowered in terms of power scaling. Oren is for sure overpowered, but in terms of scaling him, many uncertainties arises due to fallacies and other problems, which makes a proper scale for him impossible. And that's why Oren is unscalable and not in a good way. The reason why I said unscalable in a not good way is to talk about a comment which mentioned about it. In one of my videos, a person said that when I am from World of Darkness is deemed unscalable. That's a good thing, but when the same is related to Oren, it is deemed as bad. which seems kind of biased. But there is a big difference between unscalable between both of them. One is unscalable due to flaws within it and its story, whereas the other is deemed as unscalable due to there being no more scales for measuring the scale of the being. As the being breaks the entire system, there is no longer any tier to scale it, therefore that's why it is deemed as unscalable. There is two completely different type of unscalable and no bias is there in scaling either of them. So yeah, that's what today's video was all about. Shitting on Oren for nearly 10 minutes. That's it for today, and maybe this year. So I will now meet you next year.